Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. Today with me is Daniel McAdams. Daniel, good to see you.
Good morning, Dr. Paul.
Well, there's some breaking news this morning, and I think we ought to comment on this news out of Washington. We have to keep an eye on that Congress to see what they're doing. The big news, of course, everybody's been listening to, the Pope is big news and will remain that way. But in some ways, this news about Boehner resigning the speakership and also from Congress, in some ways was a little bit related, to the Pope. But I want to talk a little bit the meaning of this. Are you feeling a lot better today and think the conservatives have won and that government will now shrink now that we have Boehner out? Because you do know that Boehner was a pretty good friend of Nancy Pelosi's and they got along pretty well, and they were conspiring to keep the government going and not cut a nickel out of Planned Parenthood. So what are your expectations? Are you going to be an optimist today?
I don't feel that the system or the regime change in the House will produce very much different.
Yeah, well, I'm afraid that is the case because, my thoughts are that it'll be more the same. They talk about the various possible individuals that might replace Boehner, but none of them seem to be, real conservative or constitutionalist. But it's almost beside the point because the momentum is so great, for more spending. But what really gets me is the fact that conservatives who finally want to stand their ground are willing to shut down the government, which is fine with me, but it's over, the Planned Parenthood, which is a very important issue, but I don't think it has anything to do with money. And besides, I think at times they're hypocritical because we've seen in the past where they would pretend to be against abortion, but they would get the money in indirectly and they would keep funding these programs. They never look at it on principle, like, should they be doing any of this? Why are they asking one group of people to finance birth control pills, let alone abortion?
Yeah, I noticed that the budget, one of the budgets put forth by McConnell, that was the extreme one that cut funding for Planned Parenthood. It took all that money and just put it into other women's health clinics. So that was not a penny cut, really. So what's conservative about that?
Yeah, and once again, they're building momentum, and there's a political advantage to some individuals that if they can close down the government, they'll get some political points. And yet, do you think we're ever going to see the day when conservatives, limited government, constitutionalists will stand up and say, we're not going to vote for this budget unless you cut out all the funding for these illegal, unconstitutional, insane wars that we're involved in? What are the odds of them even hinting to that? Matter of fact, it's almost the opposite because they want to get rid of sequestration and all this mess. They're not, with this holdup here. Behind the scenes, the Boehner and the Pelosi's are getting together to get rid of sequestration, so funding will go up both on welfare and on warfare.
Exactly, and of course the media falls right into line. They report this change as the rise of the radical right, and even Pelosi warned against the right-wing conservatives taking power. But as you say, the right-wing conservatives are not right-wing because they're cutting funding. They're right-wing because they want to push defense spending way through the roof.
See, this is the unfortunate thing is that everybody sees it right and left, Republican and Democrat, but it's not big government intervention versus non-government intervention and personal liberty. That never seems to be in the discussion, and the discussion that we work hard to try to get out in the open. So they're arguing just about management style, and how do you fool the people long enough? But part of the problem why they're under the gun is the people know there's a problem with the budget. I mean, they see every day about how bad the pension funds are, and Puerto Rico going bankrupt and Detroit going bankrupt. So there's an economic factor here too. So the politicians respond to that. But to me, unfortunately, it's just a pretense that they're not really serious.
Everyone's talking about Kevin McCarthy as a possible replacement for John Boehner. And you served in the House with Representative McCarthy. Do you see this as a real departure then from the Boehner regime?
Well, I think it's irrelevant. But Kevin was a very nice person. He was very friendly. He would even talk to libertarians, and he would come across as a conservative. But I don't think deep down in his heart that that's his real goal. I think he had political ambitions, and I think he had the right personality. But no, he'll be one that'll be more of the same. It'll be the same type of thing because there's no other way currently to manage affairs because of the bankruptcy, and how are they going to do this? So they have to get together and try to protect each other's special project. That's why I think it's so symbolic when we think of a picture, and there were a lot of pictures with Boehner and Pelosi. There they are. I think that really points out the problem, that there is no difference. And yet, just think of the campaigns going on right now. It's conservative Republicans against liberal Democrats, and yet deep down there's no change in policy. If you look at monetary policy, if you look at foreign policy, if you look at welfare policy, if you look at deep concern about the debt, it's just a handful, and we knew handful or two of individuals who did really care about the debt and understood it and voted against all the spending. But no, this resignation, I think it caught people by surprise, the way it came about, and I'm surprised too. But when you think about it, I guess so. He's under the gun. He's had enough of this, and it's interesting that the visit of the Pope seemed to have something to do with it, because John, as a Catholic and somebody who always wanted to get the Pope to speak before Congress. Now, for some reason, I have a lot of mixed feelings about that. I don't quite endorse. I'm not, opposed to it so much, but I don't like spiritual leaders to get too much involved in promoting ideas that I think are detrimental to the people. And when you promote some of the big government programs, and I don't like this idea of co-opting the idea of charity and concern for the poor as a political thing, especially it reflects on the fact that there's a lack of understanding on how markets work, and if you really are concerned about the poor, you're not looking for government redistribution of wealth.
It's sad that at one time all churches and synagogues in the U.S. fought for separation from government. They were taking care of the poor. They didn't want to be involved and co-opted by government, and now they all seem to have drank the poison pill.
Yeah, it's a real shame. I've always admired the Mormon Church because they try to teach people to take care of themselves. My parents were very much in Meals on Wheels for many, many years, like 20 years, but it was always worked through the church, and it was voluntary. And toward the end, when my dad was probably still in his 80s and 90s, and he was still making these trips, he became disappointed. He says, now it's part of government. Government's getting involved. I mean, it didn't collapse Meals on Wheels, but to him it was still part of his church work that he did. So unfortunately, that is the case. I mean, think about our hospitals. How were the great hospitals started? Through the churches and voluntary. I mean, there was no, great big federal funding for our hospitals. In the same way with our great universities, that wasn't the case. That we've just, so many of us have given up on the fact that it happens. I was pushed the other day by somebody interviewing, and they said, well, then I couldn't have sent my kids to Baylor University, and they get funds from the government. But how does he know that? Maybe the cost would have been less than 50%, and the cost would have been done. But they don't look at that. They look at what they think they're getting. They don't look at what is not seen. And that is the big problem. So I am not all optimistic. I think the turmoil doesn't hurt one bit. Brings out the discussion. But I think those of us in the category of believing in limited government and the Constitution have an opportunity to point out what the real issues are. And of course, I think the real issues today is the fact that the government is too big, there's too much spending, there's too much debt, the Federal Reserve runs roughshod over us, and this is not what this debate is going to be about on Planned Parenthood. And my prediction is that Planned Parenthood will will get the money. There may be a shutdown of government, but it will not shut down government. I've never met anybody that said, boy, don't shut down government. I remember last time, you know, I lost my paycheck and all. The people who are laid off usually get their money, and the people who might say something are the ones who might not be able to get into the Washington Monument. It's all a facade. It's all fake. It's all just political grandstanding. And I think the sooner the people realize that it is, and it's a contest on one-upsmanship, who holds the gavel, who holds the power string, but not on issues. And it will have to be on the issues in order to change things. And the people themselves will have to decide, we're giving up on the government because they cannot provide. All they get is debt and with the elimination of our personal liberties, and they give us these senseless wars which drain us. So when that is the issue, we might be able to solve our problems. Today, with the resignation of John Boehner, no matter who takes his place, will not solve our problem. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report, and please come back soon.